She wore a wedding dress to my wedding, tried to sabotage the vows, and became an internet meme overnight. Am I the Ahole for letting the world see her true colors? I have never, in my entire life, felt pure, unfiltered rage the way I did on my wedding day. Not when my sister stole my first boyfriend in high school just to prove she could. Not when she faked an injury to pull attention away from my college graduation. Not even when she announced her engagement at my engagement party, making the whole event about her. No, nothing compared to the moment when I turned around, standing at the entrance of my wedding venue, ready to walk down the aisle, and saw Sarah standing there, wearing a full-length white wedding dress. Not just any dress, a fully lace-covered wedding gown with a long train, a flowing veil, and a floor-length design, and she was not alone. Behind her stood 3 women in matching pink dresses. She had brought her own bridesmaids. I, 28-year-old woman, should have seen this coming. I really should have. My sister Sarah, 30-year-old woman, has always been the golden child, the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was always just there. The shadow, the backup dancer, the one who was expected to step aside so she could shine. Sarah had an obsession with making everything about herself. When I got a new dress, she suddenly needed the same one, but better. If I had a crush on a boy, she'd flirt with him just to prove she could. Even when I achieved something huge, like getting into my dream college, my parents still gushed over whatever mundane thing Sarah was doing instead. I spent years trying to earn my parents' approval, but it was a losing battle. They would always side with Sarah. I thought that would change once we became adults. I thought wrong. Looking back, there were so many signs that Sarah was planning something insane. When I announced my wedding, Sarah immediately assumed she'd be my maid of honor. She didn't ask. She just told me. So when I chose my best friend Anna instead, she lost her mind. She pouted for weeks and refused to talk to me. She made snide comments like, "Well, I guess sisters don't mean anything anymore." She kept suspiciously bringing up the wedding, saying things like, "Oh, you're going to be so surprised on your big day." At the time, I thought she was just being dramatic. I had no idea how serious she was. When I found the dress of my dreams, I was so excited to show my family. My mom cried, Anna cheered, even my dad said, "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Sarah? She barely looked at it. She just crossed her arms and muttered, interesting choice." And then she immediately changed the subject. I should have known something was off. Whenever Sarah and I had an argument, my parents always sided with her. But the weeks leading up to my wedding, they kept telling me, "Don't be so hard on Sarah. You know how she is. Please don't make a big deal out of anything on your wedding day." I assumed they were just trying to keep the peace. I was wrong. They knew. They knew what she was planning, and they didn't stop her. The morning of my wedding was perfect. The venue was breathtaking, the flowers were stunning, and for the first time in my life, I felt like the main character. Then just as I was about to walk down the aisle, I heard a gasp. I turned around, and my blood ran cold. Sarah had arrived, and she was wearing a full-length white wedding gown. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. Sarah wasn't just wearing a white dress. She was wearing a dress that was arguably fancier than mine. Lace detailing, a dramatic train, a completely over-the-top veil. And as if that wasn't enough, she had bridesmaids. Yes, she brought her own goddamn bridesmaids. A group of 3 girls, all dressed in matching pink gowns, standing behind her like she was the fucking bride. Guests froze in shock. My bridesmaids looked horrified. Jake, my fiancé, stiffened next to me, his grip tightening around my hand. And Sarah? She smiled. Then she walked right up to me, looked me up and down and said, "Oh wow, I guess we had the same idea." Like this was some kind of joke. I could feel my face burning. My heart pounded. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream, cry, or throw her out myself. But before I could say a word, Sarah turned to her bridesmaids and said, "Come on, ladies, let's take some photos before the ceremony starts." She started posing like this was her wedding. I thought that was the worst thing she could do. I was wrong. Because Sarah wasn't just trying to steal my spotlight, she was about to steal my entire wedding. I had hoped, for one fleeting moment, that Sarah showing up in a wedding dress would be the worst thing she'd do that day. I was wrong. Because she wasn't just wearing the dress. She was here to steal the entire wedding. As the ceremony began, I tried to keep my focus on Jake, on our vows, on the moment we had been waiting for. But Sarah? Oh no, she wasn't done making the whole thing about herself. The first sign of trouble was when the MC announced my entrance. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the bride." And then, Sarah stood up. She stood up first. She waved, like she thought the guests were standing for her. My heart dropped as I saw some people hesitate, unsure if they should be looking at me or Sarah. And then, as I stepped forward with my father ready to walk down the aisle, Sarah started walking too, right next to me, side by side, like this was some kind of insane joint wedding. I heard murmurs, gasps. My bridesmaids stiffened, glancing at each other in disbelief. Sarah was smiling, her veil fluttering slightly behind her, walking just slow enough to make it seem like we were two brides entering together. I glanced at my father, practically begging him with my eyes to do something. But he looked at me, then at Sarah, and then, he did absolutely nothing. I should have known. I was on my own. I somehow made it to the altar, standing next to Jake, whose grip on my hands had become deathly tight. Sarah, meanwhile, placed herself right in the front row, her ridiculous wedding dress spilling onto the floor like she owned the damn place. And then I noticed something even worse. My mother was crying. At first I thought, wow, she's actually happy for me. But then I saw where she was looking. Not at me, not at Jake. She was staring at Sarah. Crying because of how beautiful Sarah looked. My entire body went cold. Despite it all, I tried to focus. I tried to ignore Sarah. And then came the moment. The officiant smiled at Jake and me, his voice warm and steady. "If anyone has any objections to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." For a moment, silence. I exhaled, thinking, finally, it's done. And then, Sarah stood up, loudly, dramatically. Gasps echoed through the venue. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Jake stiffened beside me, his entire body going rigid. Sarah, standing tall, looked directly at the officiant and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I object." The entire room went still. People were whispering. Some were shaking their heads in disgust. The officiant, bless his poor confused heart, looked around awkwardly before managing to ask, "And why do you object?" Sarah flipped her veil dramatically over her shoulder. And then she pointed at me, "Because she doesn't deserve him." What the fuck? I literally felt my soul leave my body. Sarah kept going. "Jake deserves someone better. Someone who actually loves him, not someone who's just using him to get attention." I heard audible gasps. Someone, probably Anna, let out a furious, "What the hell?" Jake, he was breathing heavily, his fists clenched, his entire body shaking. I felt numb. I turned to look at my mother. She was covering her mouth with her hands, but she wasn't horrified. She looked like she had been expecting this. For the first time in my life, I couldn't hold it in. My voice came out low, dangerous, shaking with rage. "Sit down." Sarah's eyebrows shot up in mock innocence. "Oh, I'm sorry, are you mad? I thought we were being honest today." The room felt like it was closing in on me. I could hear murmurs, people whispering. Jake suddenly dropped my hands. My stomach twisted. He turned to Sarah. His expression was unreadable. Then, in a voice that was terrifyingly calm, he said, "Are you done embarrassing yourself?" Sarah faltered. For the first time all night, she actually looked nervous. Jake continued, "Because if you're not done, I can have security remove you." Oh my God. But even as Jake put Sarah in her place, I knew this wasn't enough. Sarah had crossed a line she could never come back from. I turned to the officiant and said loud and clear, "I'd like to take a short break before we continue." Jake, instantly understanding what I was doing, nodded. The officiant, now 1000% done with this circus, just sighed and said, "All right, we'll take a brief intermission." The moment the words left his mouth, I turned to my wedding coordinator. "Make sure the AV team is ready." She nodded. Because what Sarah didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Because I knew she would pull something. And by the time this night was over, she was going to wish she had never stepped foot in this wedding. Sarah thought she had humiliated me. She thought she had ruined my wedding, stolen my moment, and forced herself into the spotlight. But Sarah forgot one thing. This was my day, and she had just handed me the perfect opportunity to destroy her. Sarah was still smirking, standing in the middle of the aisle in her stolen spotlight, like she had just pulled off the greatest prank in history. Guests were still whispering, some looking at me, waiting to see what I would do. Jake, beside me, looked furious but calm, as if he was waiting for me to make the next move. And then I smiled, a slow, chilling smile, because I knew exactly how I was going to end this. I grabbed the microphone from the officiant, turned to the guests, and said loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're enjoying the show." Sarah's smirk faltered. The guests laughed, some awkwardly, some loudly. Sarah wasn't expecting that. I turned toward her and continued, "Sarah has gone to such great lengths to make sure this day is unforgettable, so I think we should all take a moment to really appreciate her unique performance." More laughter. Sarah's face twitched. She wasn't sure if she should be proud or scared. Good. I wasn't going to expose her directly. I was going to make her expose herself. I held up a hand, silencing the murmurs. "Sarah, since you seem so invested in this wedding, why don't you tell us all? When did you decide that you wanted to be a bride today?" The entire room went dead silent. Sarah blinked. "What?" "Come on," I said sweetly. "Everyone's curious. I mean, most people just show up in a nice dress, but you went all out. So tell us, what inspired this masterpiece?" The guests leaned in. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. She was trapped. If she admitted it was a joke, she looked like an attention-starved idiot. If she said she had a reason, she had to explain herself in front of hundreds of people. Her brain was scrambling for an answer. And then, she made the worst mistake of her life. She laughed, and she said, "Oh, come on, it's just a dress. It's not like I actually thought I was the bride." I gasped dramatically. "Oh, so you knew you weren't the bride? That's interesting because..." I turned toward the wedding coordinator, who was already holding up an actual copy of our seating chart. "Because according to this, you demanded to be seated at the bridal table." Gasps. Sarah visibly stiffened. I wasn't done. "And let's not forget the little detail where you tried to be the first to dance with my husband." Sarah laughed nervously. "It was just for fun." "Oh, and remember when you stood up during the vows?" I cut her off. The guests were turning. Someone muttered, "Wait, yeah, what the hell was that about?" Another person whispered, "Did she really think she was part of the wedding?" I had planted the seed of doubt. And now, the crowd was doing my job for me. Sarah looked around, realizing she was losing control. People were shaking their heads, whispering. I could see it in her eyes. Panic. She had wanted attention, but now she was getting the wrong kind. I turned back to her and said the final nail in her coffin. "Sarah, if it was just a joke, why do you look so embarrassed right now?" Silence. Then laughter. Loud, merciless. Sarah was drowning in it. She turned red, her hands clenching into fists. Then she spun on her heel and stormed out of the wedding. Alone. My mother, seeing the disaster unfold, tried to follow her. But my father, for the first time in his life, he didn't move. He just sat there watching his eldest daughter flee, and then he clapped. And the guests? They followed. Applause filled the entire venue as Sarah disappeared from sight. As soon as she was gone, I turned back to the officiant. "Now, where were we?" The room cheered. Jake took my hands, laughing softly. That was incredible, and this time, nothing ruined my wedding. Sarah walked out of my wedding alone, humiliated and publicly shamed. But that was just the beginning of her downfall. Because actions have consequences. And Sarah? She was about to learn that the hard way. The moment the wedding was over, my phone exploded with messages. "Holy shit, that was insane. Your sister's completely lost it." I can't stop laughing, but my favorite, a text from my father. "Proud of you, she needed that." And then, radio silence from Sarah, not a single word for days. And then the real disaster struck. A week later, one of my wedding guests posted a TikTok about what happened, and it went viral. Millions of views, thousands of comments. The headline? Bride's sister shows up in a wedding dress and instantly regrets it. The video included clips from the wedding showing Sarah's ridiculous entrance, her standing up during the vows, and then, the moment the entire room turned on her. It was a masterpiece. And the comments? They were brutal. "This is some main character delusion on another level. She really thought she could steal a whole-ass wedding. That oh shh moment when the bride flips the script, chef's kiss." Sarah became a meme, and she had no idea, until she did. One night, I got a text from Sarah. It was a single message. "You ruined my life." "Oh, honey, I didn't ruin your life. You did that all by yourself." Then 2 days later, my mother called. She was sobbing. You have to fix this, she wailed. Sarah is devastated. Apparently, Sarah had found out about the TikTok, and she was losing her mind. She tried reporting the video. She tried messaging the creator, demanding they take it down. She even made a public post, claiming she was set up. It backfired spectacularly. People dug up her old social media posts. They found more stories of her being toxic. And suddenly, she was trending for all the wrong reasons. Sarah finally broke her silence. She made a post on Facebook dramatically claiming, "I was just trying to support my sister and now I'm being bullied online. This isn't fair." Oh, my God. The audacity. And the best part, nobody believed her. Even our own family started calling her out. My cousin replied, "Girl, you literally stood up and tried to object at the wedding. Sit down." And the comments? They were brutal. "You did this to yourself. Karma is a bitch and so are you. Why would anyone believe you after what you pulled?" Sarah deleted the post, but the damage was already done. A few weeks later, my mother showed up at my house, crying. "She's miserable," she pleaded. "You've made your point. Just forgive her." I stared at her. Forgive her? For trying to steal my wedding? For publicly humiliating me? For throwing a tantrum because she wasn't the center of attention? Absolutely. Fucking not. I took a deep breath and said no. My mother gasped. "What do you mean no?" I smiled. "I mean no. Sarah doesn't exist to me anymore. And if you keep pushing me, you won't either." My mother's face went pale. She opened her mouth to argue. Then she saw the look in my eyes, and she knew. I was done. Sarah lost everything. Her reputation was destroyed. She became the joke of the internet. Even her closest friends started distancing themselves. And me? I moved on. I married Jake. I cut off Sarah. I never looked back. Then, months later, I got one last message from her. "I miss you." I left her on read, because honestly, I didn't miss her at all.